Towards a New Socialism. Section. Democracy and Parliamentarism. It is one of the great ironies of history that election by ballot, for millennia the mark of oligarchy, should now pass as the badge of democracy. In his dystopian novel 1984, Orwell makes an ironic reference to newspeak, a dialect of English so corrupted that phrases like freedom is slavery or war is peace could pass unremarked. What he is alluding to is the power of language to control our thoughts. When those in authority can redefine the meanings of words, they make subversion literally unthinkable. The phrase parliamentary democracy is an example of newspeak, a contradiction in disguise. Go back to the Greek origins of the word democracy. The second half of the word means power or rule. Hence we have autocracy, rule by one man, and aristocracy, ruled by the aristoi, the best people, the elite. Democracy meant rule by the demos. Most commentators translate this as rule by the people. But the word demos had a more specific meaning. It meant rule by the common people, or rule by the poor. Aristotle, describing the democracies of his day, was quite explicit about the fact that democracy meant rule by the poor. Countering the argument that democracy simply meant rule by the majority, he gave the following example. Quote, suppose a total of 1,300. 1,000 of these are rich, and they give no share in office to the 300 poor, who are also free men and in other respects like them. No one would say that these 1,300 lived under democracy. Politics, 1290. End of quote. But he says this is an artificial case, due to the fact that the rich are everywhere few and the poor numerous. As a specific definition he gives, quote, a democracy exists whenever those who are free and are not well off, being in a majority, are in sovereign control of the government. An oligarchy when control lies in the hands of the rich and the better born, these being few. Ibid. End of quote. With regard to the filling of official positions, he further remarked that in Greece, quote, to do this by lot is regarded as democratic, by selection oligarchic. Politics, 1294. End of quote. What the ideologists of capitalism call democratic procedures would be more accurately described as cephonomic procedures. Greek cephos, vote by ballot. By glossing over the nature of class relations, such ideologies confuse the right to vote with the exercise of power. In fact, all capitalist states are plutocratic oligarchies. Plutocracy is ruled by a moneyed class. Oligarchy is ruled by the few. These are the characteristic principles of the modern state. This state, the end or telos of history, according to Fukuyama, 1992, the most perfect form of class rule since the Roman Republic, exercises such hegemony, spiritual and temporal, that it appears to have banished all competition. Effective power resides in a series of concentric circles, concentrating as they contract through parliament and cabinet to prime minister or president, oligarchy. This power is openly exercised in the name of capital, it being now accepted by all concerned that the job of government is to serve the ends of business, the highest objective of a state, plutocracy. The plutocracy's power derives from its command over wage labor, a relationship of dominance and servitude whose dictatorial nature is not abolished by the right to vote. Psephonomia, or election, is merely a mechanism for the selection of individual oligarchs. It at once lends legitimacy to their rule, and enables these to be recruited from the best and most energetic members of the lower classes, aristoi. At best, election transforms oligarchy into aristocracy. Aristotle regarded oligarchy as a deviation from aristocracy. Quote, however, the name aristocracy is used to make a distinction from oligarchy. It describes a constitution in which election to office depends on merit, and not only on wealth. But oligarchy readily passes for aristocratic, since almost everywhere the rich and the well-educated upper classes are co-extensive. Politics, 1293. End of quote. Substitute meritocratic for aristocratic, and the verbal change well encapsulates the historical metamorphosis of British society since the early 19th century. As Parliament was opened to individuals of merit who were not necessarily well born. But the key question is not that some individuals of relatively humble origin are recruited to public office. It is who holds power. All else is illusory. Another long quote from Aristotle. Quote, what differentiates oligarchy and democracy is wealth or the lack of it. The essential point is that where the possession of political power is due to the possession of economic power or wealth, that is oligarchy. And when the unpropertied class have power, that is democracy. But as we have said, the former are few and the latter are many. Politics, 1279. End of quote. Parliamentary government and democracy are polar opposites. Democracy is ruled by the masses, by the poor and dispossessed. Parliament, ruled by professional politicians, who in numbers and class position are part of the oligarchy. Marx and Engels quite explicitly followed the Aristotelian definition of democracy when they wrote, in the Communist Manifesto of 1848, that, quote, the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of the ruling class, to win the battle of democracy. End quote. The violent overthrow of the aristocratic state and the establishment of proletarian rule were, for the founders of communism, synonymous with democracy. They spoke in 1852 of proletarian rule as the dictatorship of the proletariat. Dictator is a word deriving from the Roman Republic rather than Greece. It refers to one individual who was given temporary power to rule by decree in an emergency. There was a natural tendency for temporary dictatorship to degenerate into lifelong rule. Lenin and Stalin were dictators in this Roman sense. Is this what Marx meant by the dictatorship of the proletariat? Certainly not. What he meant was a mass democracy, unconstrained by entrenched constitutional rights, defending private property. 2,500 years earlier, Aristotle had described such democracies. Quote, another type of democracy is the same in other respects, but the multitude is sovereign and not the law. This occurs when the decrees are sovereign over the provisions of the law. When states are democratically governed according to the law, there are no demagogues, and the best citizens are securely in the saddle. But where the laws are not sovereign, you will find demagogues. The people becomes a monarch, one person composed of many. For the many are sovereign, not as individuals, but in aggregate. Politics, 1292. End of quote. And what did these demagogues propose? Communistic measures like the cancellation of debts and the redistribution of property. For a democracy to be of any use to the proletariat, the masses must be sovereign, unchained by the rule of law, able to issue decrees that violate well-established rights to property in land or capital. End of section.